One of the most brilliant things about the Sri Singh Sahib was his ability to not only be fully present in the here and now, and be interacting with all of the energies that were going on in the here and now, but be completely cognizant of what the future held, and the interactions and the sequence and the consequence of what we do now and how it impacts the parts of the future. He wasn't so big on the past, and he was not that interested in the academic intersections of history and the present. He was really interested in the present and the intersections with the future. And that, I think, is one of the teachings that he gave us about the Aquarian age that is really the most exciting. And as we go from this day forward, how important that is in our lives. What I would like to talk about really is the Sri Singh Sahib's intersection with New Mexico. Because how remote New Mexico was and is, and yet this was his home. He said in one of his famous lectures that God is everywhere. Guru Ram Das is everywhere, but his mailing address is Espanola. So really, his first experience of Espanola happened very soon after he came to the United States. When he came to Los Angeles for the first time, he saw the young people and the hippies and the people in change, and the whole generation that was in change, as Ravi Harsing was talking about. And he saw in them not only the essence of their presence, but the potential of their future. We were talking not that long ago about how incredibly difficult it must have been for him and for BBG to be able to even relate to us when we were in our younger years. Most of you here are too young to remember, but it wasn't all that glorious being a hippie. It was pretty dirty in a lot of ways, and it was very tentative. And yet he was not hesitant in any way to be thoroughly involved with this group of people. Now, please don't misunderstand me. Not everybody of the pioneer 3HOers were hippies. Many people came from the military. They came from business. They came from high levels of society. They came from the Hollywood scene. But there was a big hunk of people that really came from the Woodstock Nation. And the Sri Singh Sahib came to this country as a high-level military man. He was a man of distinction, of accomplishment. He was a man of means and of a lot of dignity. And he dove right into the Woodstock Nation. So in 1969, there were several very now historic communes in California, the Hog Farm and the Juke Savages. And it was with the Juke Savages that the Sri Singh Sahib got into a VW bus and rode from Los Angeles to New Mexico. Because the Juke Savages got together once a year at the summer solstice to have a big love-in, more or less. He got in the minivan and drove out here with them and participated in that first summer solstice of 1969. He went back to Los Angeles, and he came out again in 1970. In 1970, the gathering was at Santa Clara Canyon, which is just down the road here. And the gathering was so big, and it was so obnoxious that the Native Americans actually threw everybody out. There was too much drugs, and there were too many naked people, and they told them they had to leave, they couldn't stay, because that is sacred Native American land. So with nowhere to go, The Sri Singh Sahib then jumped in and worked out a solution for them. And a very good friend of the Sri Singh Sahibs, Robert Bossier, who lived here in the valley, and he had a house on the road to Santa Fe. Do you all know where Gabriel's restaurant is? That was Robert's house. And so the whole summer solstice camp moved into his backyard. So there they were with no food, no water, barely tents. So the Sri Singh Sahib called up the local government, and our state representative at that time was Bruce King, who went on to be governor, a 4-term governor. So Bruce King came out, and he would tell us this story every single year at the Sri Singh Sahib's birthday. He would come and say, I saw all those young people, and I said to my wife, Alice, with the first strong wind, they're all gonna blow away. But you're still here. But even at that time, he became a friend of ours. He brought in a truck of water. He brought in truckloads of watermelon. And that we now claim as the first 3HO summer solstice. From there, it really did become a summer solstice of 3HO. And starting in the next year, the Sri Singh Sahib taught white tantric yoga at the summer solstice. But those were the humble beginnings of him coming to New Mexico. It was never a grand scheme. It was living right here, right now in the present, knowing that this future was going to intersect with this group. He was wonderfully impersonally personal in that way. When he dealt with you one-on-one, it was incredibly personal. And yet it was impersonal in the sense that you may or may not be here tomorrow, but somebody will be in your shoes. We write the song that when one falls, 10 take their place. And that's the way it was with 3HO. He loved you unconditionally. But if you were gone tomorrow, then he loved the next person who stood in your shoes unconditionally. Because he lived in this presence. When you received his love, you could get a big swelled head that it was because of your greatness and your radiance and your special place in history that you received that love. But if you stayed around long enough and you saw that maybe you're here today and you're gone tomorrow, that love only comes when you're in your consciousness. And that's a reality that's a truth, and it's a reality that exists today. If you can stay in your consciousness, you can receive all those gifts and blessings. And if you slip out of that, if by your choice you slip out of that consciousness, then it's all out of your reach. So when he came here, he came as a visitor until 1974, when he and BBG bought their first house here, which is the Gold House, where we used to have ladies' camp. And they would stay there whenever they would come. I came to Espanola at that time as a 18-year-old, and I used to sleep on the floor of the kitchen in the Gold House when no one was there. And then the next year, they bought the ranch house, which we know now that's on the highway. And that's when the Sri Singh Sahib really made this his home. And it was 2 years later, in 1977, when summer solstice had started to really pick up, that there were hundreds of people that came every year at summer solstice, that 3HO had really set its roots down into this ground. So Sri Singh Sahib knew we needed to have a place that would be ours forever. And so one day, driving home from Santa Fe, he told his driver, just keep driving. So they passed the entrance. He says, just keep driving. So he drove through town, and he said, just drive up into those hills. So really, without knowing where to go or how to go there, turned off on the dirt road that goes up into the hills. driving, and then there was a man with a flat tire on the road. So stopped the car, and he himself got out of the car, and he said, "Is any of this, who owns this land?" And he said, "Well, you know, mostly this is government land." He said, "But is there any, but there's one plot of private land that's up on that ridge." So they drove up to the top of the hill, and you know where it gets really flat before you drive up again towards Ramdaspuri? When the Sri Singh Sahib came up onto that flat plateau, he said he saw the clouds filled with angels. He saw that there was a light that was filled with divine beings. And he said, this is where we need to be. In that whole area, there was only one parcel that was privately owned. And it happened to be for sale. And so he bought that land as Ramdaspuri. So each of these intersections that he had with New Mexico and with us here was so divinely driven in that it was part of the present, but connected to the future. And I want to end it with something that happened right at the end of his life. We had our first Japji course was really the last course that he was able to teach at. And those of you that were there remember he came in a wheelchair and spoke very beautifully, but it was a real effort for him to actually have the pranas to be able to deliver those teachings. And at the end of every day, we'd go over to the dome and he'd say, "How did it go?" We'd tell him how it went. And what I always enjoyed with the Sri Singh Sahib was his humanness. And it was really fun to try to get him to laugh. And part of getting him, you had to think in a really clever way to get him to laugh. So at the end of one day, he said, we went over and he asked how the day went. We gave him the report. And he said, "And what do you think of it?" I said, "Well, sir, I think it's really beautiful. But, you know, most of the people there, they're just hippies." And he got really angry, and his eyes clouded over, and he was laying flat on the bed, and he actually rose up out of the bed as if to yell at me. And then I started to laugh because I had said it because I knew that would make him angry, because the young people are always something that he held so precious in his heart. And he realized that I got his goat, and so he laid back down, and he closed his eyes. And then he opened them up with those. Of course, none of this is ever for, you never get to do that for free, you know. So he opens it up and stares at me and he says, "You can call them hippies, but these are the people who are going to carry the Sri Guru Granth Sahib on their head into the future." And then he closed his eyes again. And that's actually the last real interaction I had with him. And I will never forget that. And so all of us as teachers and as guides, as mothers and as sisters, as husbands, brothers, we have that Sangit of the entire world to serve. Don't judge them for what you see today. Don't judge yourself by what you are today. See the potential in all. And remember, whatever judgment you're tempted to give, that person is the person who's going to carry the Sri Guru Granth Sahib on their head into the future. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.